My name is Ben Oj. I'm the lead pastor here at NewSpirit.Church. I want you to think of the one most important word in your life. This is a thought exercise. I'm asking you to engage in it. What's the one word that comes to mind? The most important word in your life. If you had to pick one, what is it? Would you pick a life goal? Like, what word would you pick to encapsulate that life goal you have? Or if you had to pick one word to define your character or your aspired character, what word would you choose to capture that? If you could only choose one word to represent everything you value, everything you stand for in your entire life, one word, what would you choose? Some people would choose the word happiness because it describes that feeling of joy and satisfaction that comes with a life that's well lived, fulfilled, joyful living, happiness. Some people would choose the word successful because it means you've really achieved and accomplished something. You've left an impact on the world and you're worthy of being remembered long after you're gone. Success really captures that. And I think a lot of people would choose the word love because that means that you've been altruistic, you've been compassionate, you've made the world a better place, not just through affecting a system or a society, but really by affecting people with kindness and empathy. Love really captures that. And I love these three words. Whatever word you chose, I'm sure it's a great word as well. And I believe Christians, we're definitely called to live a life of love and a life of I believe we're called to live a successful life and even a life of happiness. But there's one word that, in the eyes of God, stands above those words. That stands above even the word that you chose, because when we're standing at the gates of heaven, He's not going to ask us, were you happy? When we're standing up there, He's not going to ask us, were you successful in this life? He's not even going to ask you, were you happy? Instead, people who walk through the gates and see the inside of heaven are going to hear God say this: well done, my good and faithful servant. Was that already up there?
No.
Oh, you got it. You guys are good at this. Wow, you come up here. Did anyone choose that word? That was the word you chose in your head?
Totally.
Oh, come on. She's always brown-nosing. Oh, my goodness. All right. Hey, so whatever word you chose, really start to visualize that word. I want you to keep that word. It's fine. Keep the word. But you're going to elevate faithful to the top of your list. That one word is going to stand above the rest because that one word can change your life forever and even change your next life forever if we're faithful. And so I'm asking you to make a decision today. I am faithful, because nobody is faithful by accident. Nobody stumbles into faithfulness. It's always intentional. It's always a choice. It's always a decision. No one stands before God and He says, actually, it turns out here you were pretty faithful. I know you weren't trying, but wow, good on you. That's not going to happen. Everyone who He says that to is going to have made a choice and is going to have tried and been very intentional about being faithful. People who are faithful on purpose. It's always a decision they've made. And so this is part of a series we're doing called Pre-Decide. It's all about decisions. The idea is that the quality of our decisions really affects the quality of our lives. People who you see living a great life, you can look at a series of great decisions they've made. And the idea is that we make our decisions and then our decisions make us. We're going to decide now what we're going to do later. When we come to those decisions and we're tired and we're a little frustrated, we don't make good decisions in those moments. That's why we pre-decide now what we're going to do in those moments. We pre-decide before we get there. In week 1, we pre-decided to, say it with me, pre-decided to
take back your life.
Take back my life. Week 2, what did we decide?
I'm ready.
I'm ready. Week 3, we said,
I am consistent.
and then week 4, we decided,
I am devoted.
and last week we talked about how
I am generous.
I am generous. I wanted you to pre-decide these things for your life. If you missed one of those sermons, go back on YouTube, look us up, NewSpirit.Church, watch one of those, make a decision between you and God and the computer, maybe share one with a friend. But today I'm asking you to make another pre-decision. I am faithful. Jesus warns us that this is very difficult. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. Everyone would be faithful. Everyone would be doing what's right, even when it's hard. But what do we know? we know that most people don't do what's hard. Most people do what's easy. Most people do what's convenient. Most people just follow the path of least resistance. Why? Why do we do that?
It's easy.
Not because it's easy, but because it's selfish, guys. It's kind of selfish to just do what we want, do what's easy, do the path of least resistance. And if you can admit that you're selfish, really, that's the first step to being a Christian, is just admitting, man, I've been living this life all about me. I am selfish. If you can admit that, would you look at your neighbor and just admit it? Just say to your neighbor, I am selfish. Just take a moment. If you can admit that, you are on your way to being a faithful Christian. Just say it. I am selfish. Yeah. How do we know? Because when you walk into a room full of people, what do you think about?
Me.
You think about yourself. There's 100 people. You're thinking about yourself. When we have some free time, when we have some extra money, what do you spend it on?
Me.
Yeah, yourself. Like, I love my free time. I love my money.
You're white.
What do we do when someone asks us to do something? We don't really want to do it. We resist. I don't want to do that. You get mad, you get frustrated. And I want you to see how the scriptures compare selfishness on one end and faithfulness on the other. And this is a dichotomy that's even painted in the scriptures. Check out Habakkuk 2:4. It says, look at the proud. They trust in themselves and their lives are crooked. They're selfish. But the righteous will live by their faithfulness to God. There's a dichotomy, setting these two up in contrast. So today, I want you to see your faithfulness. Remember, we're pre-deciding I'm faithful. That's a battle against selfishness. And when you pre-decide I'm faithful, you're pre-deciding I've got to be less selfish. I got to stop thinking about myself so much. So that's what we've pre-decided. That's our identity. I am faithful. I'm not selfish. That's my value. I am faithful. But now, we got to look at our actions. How do we actually do this? Our formula. When faced with this, we've pre-decided to do that. So when faced with selfishness, we've pre-decided to be faithful. But how? How are we going to do that? Today, we're going to talk about three things. How to be faithful. When faced with selfishness, I've pre-decided to be faithful in how I treat people. That's first. Second, faithful in how I steward resources. And third, faithful in how I respond to God. The bottom line is, God pre-decide, I am faithful. It's the most important word in my life. Will you elevate that to the top? And a lot of Christians, when they think about their own faithfulness, their mind goes straight to faithfulness to a particular belief set, particular statement of faith. Do I believe in these words? Or am I faithful to this particular church or particular tradition or denomination or something like that? Am I faithful to the scriptures? These are where our minds go when someone asks, are you faithful? And you're probably wondering, why then are we talking about faithfulness in how we treat people, or faithfulness in resources, or faithfulness and what do those have to do with faithfulness? Those aren't the normal ways we tend to think of it. And the reason we're talking about these three categories of faithfulness is because when Jesus taught about faithfulness, it always pertained to one of these three things. And if we're going to say we're followers of Jesus, we better follow what he taught. So if we're going to be faithfulness according to his teaching, we need to be faithful in these three areas. Are you with me? Do you want to be like Jesus? Let's do it. First, we're going to be faithful in how we treat people. We're going to be faithful in our relationships. You got to be faithful in the big ones and the small ones. We're going to pre-decide that every interaction is an opportunity to add value. That's important. I'll say it again. Treat every interaction as an opportunity to add value. Every person I meet, every person I talk to, even the people I walk by, those are all opportunities. I have the opportunity to focus on myself and what I want, or I have the opportunity to bless them, to value them, to focus on what they want, what their needs are. I got the opportunity with every person I encounter to show them the same love that God shows them. And I'm not great at this. I don't want you to model me. I want you to do better than me at this because I am not good at this. But I used to be much, much worse at this. I used to work for a company. It was an office we work in an office building in an industrial park, and it looked just like Dunder Mifflin from The Office, because you'd go upstairs in this office park, and it was the kind of work environment that's just a bummer to go to every day. I would hit the snooze button a few times because I didn't want to get out of bed. Every day, I was just reluctant to go to work. I'd put on some business casual clothes. Isn't business casual the worst? It's like, I don't look good or bad. I just look beige. Like, what is this? And so I grabbed some food to go because I'm always running late. I'd rush to get to the office on time. I would roll in at 7:59 because 8 o'clock is late. 7:59, I'd rush in. I'd make a beeline to my desk. I must have looked tired because I was tired all the time. I must have looked rushed because I was rushed every single morning. I must have looked unhappy because who wouldn't be unhappy working in that office setting with those fluorescent lights and fake plants and upstairs industrial park? Like, you're not even in a real office building downtown. You're in some industrial park. It's such a bad setting to be a human. But after about a month of working there, my boss calls me into the office. He says, Ben, Ben, close the door. Does the boss ever ask you to close the door? Not good, not good. Close the door. He said, Ben, what's your deal? You come in here every day, you blow past the secretary, you blow past 6 other people, you head straight for your desk. You got your head down, you head straight for your desk, what is that? Why do you do that? And what he explained to me was that I have a bank account with every single person. Treat every single person like I have a bank account with them. And every interaction I have with them is either positive or negative. I'm either making a deposit or a withdrawal in every person. And when I walk past that secretary and say nothing, that's not a neutral transaction. That is a withdrawal. And every single day, withdrawing from that bank account, I'm overdrawn. I'm the jerk. I'm just, the temperature of the room gets cold when I walk in. Like, what's your deal? I didn't know really, what was I thinking about? Myself. All I was thinking about was me. I wasn't thinking about anyone else. I was just thinking about me. Those are not neutral interactions. My account was overdrawn. And so what he could have said is, when you walk into this office, all you think about is how tired you are. Stop doing that. How stressed you are. Stop doing that. You need to come in here thinking about other people. This was a Christian company, by the way, so he's kind of laying into me with some, like a sermon here. My boss was asking me to pre-decide to be faithful in how I treat people, be very intentional about that. And as long as I was focused on myself, I was in no position to add value to other people as I interact with them. So from then on, I tried to be aware of my bank account that I have with other people. Tried to be aware that every interaction I have is an opportunity to add value to that person. And so when I'm dealing with a service worker at anywhere, a restaurant or I don't know, a store, I try to ask, I don't just use them for a transaction. I try to ask them, like, how's your day? How's your weekend? You like working here? You're doing a good job. Thank you so much for your attention to detail. Try to humanize them. This is a person. I need to add value to that exchange. When I walk into a church, this church, anywhere, I don't simply walk right by people not noticing them. That's a big withdrawal. I don't do that. Jesus didn't do that. I shouldn't do that either. Neither should we. And I say, hey, you came early. Thank you for being early with here. Or are you new? Like, say thank you. Thank you for coming here to try this out. Have I met you before? What's your name? I talk to them. Tell me about yourself. Just tell me everything about you. I want to hear about you. I don't care about me, my church, my vision. I just want to know about you. Do you think about people that way when you come in here? I'm nervous. I got to get to my seat. Give me that cookie. Try to think about other people. One day this week, I came down the stairs at home. One of my kids had the messiest, nastiest hair. And what I wanted to say was, go brush your hair. We've talked about this. You can't go to school looking like that. What do they think of my parenting? I wanted to say all that. What did I say? I said, hey, nice outfit. And they're like, oh, thanks, Dad. Like, wow, add value. I wanted to make so many withdrawals, but my account would have been way overdrawn having said all that. Listen to what the scriptures say about this in Ephesians 4. It says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for the building up of others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. That means we're going to be faithful by building others up according to their needs, not ours. We're pre-deciding that in every interaction, it's going to benefit them, not us. That means when you walk into a room, the climate needs to change warmer. When you walk in, the place gets warm. You're not an angry, energy vampire. You're a life giver. You need to give life when you walk in the room. When you come home from work or your kids get off the bus from school, do you speak life into your family or do you pick them apart? I'm bad at this one, okay? I know firsthand. I'm going to try to stop picking them apart. You got to do the same. You're going to do that with me? Stop picking them apart. Give them life. And when you have to tell the truth, a lot of times you got to tell the truth. You got to correct a coworker. You got to give people some tough love, but build them up stronger on the other end of that. When people interact with you, they're going to be more blessed. They're going to be more loved. They're going to come away with a stronger faith after having talked to you. You're going to add encouragement. You're going to add value to their life, to every person you interact. You know why? Jesus did that. He added value to every single person he interacted with. He said to a bunch of anxious people, don't worry about tomorrow. That's adding value to anxious people. He said to an adulterous woman, neither do I condemn you. Wow, not many people were saying that. He said to his best friend Peter betrayed him, and he said, I can't trust you. He didn't say that, but he could have said, I can't trust you. What did he say? Feed my sheep. In other words, I trust you. I'm building you back up. That's what it looks like to be faithful with every interaction, with every person, to add value. What are we going to do? We're going to be faithful to God in how we treat people. Okay, you got this one. Let's go to number 2. When faced with selfishness, I have pre-decided to be faithful in how I steward resources. So number 1, we said with people, every interaction is an opportunity to add value. This one with resources. Every resource, treat it as an opportunity to multiply. Jesus said there was a master. He told a story. There's a master that went on a journey and he trusted his resources. He trusted his wealth to his servants. To one servant, he gave 5 bags of money, 5 talents. To another servant, he gave 2 bags of money, 2 talents. And then to another, he gave 1 talent. Then the master left. And after the first 2 servants, what do? They went to work. They took risk. Wise risk, but they took risk with that money, and they doubled their master's money. Good on them. I would love it if I could just give my kids some money. They come back and double it. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wow. And then the master came back from his journey. Here's what the master said. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been over a little, I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master. That word faithful comes from the Greek word pistos, and it was used back then to describe persons who showed themselves faithful in the transaction of business, the execution of commands, and the discharge of official duties. What? I thought faithfulness was about believing right theology and going to church. No, it's about you're faithful with resources, with stuff. That's how it was used back then. And so when God sees you at the gates of heaven, when God says to you, well done, good and faithful servant, what's he going to be talking about? He's going to be talking about what you did with the resources he gave you on earth. Did you waste it? No, I doubled it, God. Were you reliable? Were you trustworthy with the stuff that he gave you to manage? The 3 biggest resources God gave you were time, talent, and treasures. He gave you some of all of those things. Maybe you're like me, you got 5 bags of time, 1 bag of talent. That's a joke. But the point is, what did you do with it? Not how much did he give you. The point is, what did you actually do with all of that? Were you faithful with what he gave you, those resources? Maybe God gave you a car. If it's an ugly late 90s Honda like mine, fine. Is it clean? Do you take good care of it? Is it maintained? That's faithfulness. God gave you a job. Maybe you're not the master at your job, but you're in charge of something at your job, aren't you? Even if it's a cash register, you're in charge of it. Do you manage it well? Or are you faithful with that? Are you integral with what you've been given? Do you add value to your company? Do you bring energy to that office? Do you bring ideas to that meeting? Do you bring a good attitude? Do you bring increase to that company, to that boss? Or are you just there to drain money from it? Are you there to just take what's yours and go home and drain money from the boss, from the company? Just because you're in business doesn't mean you're not in ministry. It's one of the biggest mistakes people make. It's like, oh, I'm not in ministry. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a missionary. No, if you have a job, if you're in business, you are in ministry. Being faithful with your business resources in business is one of the most God-honoring things that you can do. Do you spend efficiently? Do you meet the needs of your community? Do you add value to the world in what you do at your workplace? Do you take risks that could multiply the business, that could add jobs to the economy, that could give more life to other people? Whatever time, whatever talent, whatever treasure God has given you, be faithful like the first two servants. Treat every resource as an opportunity to multiply and be faithful to God. Now, let's finish the story. There's one servant left. Here's what the servant with the one bag said. He said, I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. Is anyone here ever afraid of failure? Raise your hand. You're afraid of failure. Okay, yeah. You're afraid to mess up because you don't want to look stupid, right? What were you thinking about in that moment? Myself. I don't want to look stupid. I'm just not going to risk it. But that's a selfish motivation to consume all your time, to consume all that talent, spend it on yourself, spend all that treasure and talent on yourself. Jesus doesn't just call it lazy, he calls it wicked. Oh, does that sting? Yeah. It stings a little bit, doesn't it? You know why? Because that's how he intended it. He wanted that to sting a little bit when people heard that. So I just invite you, let that sting a little bit. It's supposed to. Now, that stinging, don't harbor that. Let that drive you to be different. How? How are we going to be different? We declare, now, I am faithful. I'm going to treat every resource as an opportunity to multiply. Like the two servants, I'm pre-deciding to be faithful with how I steward God's resource. I'm going to be faithful with how I steward resources. Let's look at number 3. When faced with selfishness, I've pre-decided to be faithful in how I respond to God. So first we talked about every transaction is an opportunity to add value. Then we said every resource is an opportunity to multiply. Now we're saying every prompting is an opportunity to obey God. We have to be faithful in how we respond and obey God. Most people in the world agree actually that God exists. And one of the biggest reasons that people universally, we know right from wrong. We know what's good and bad in this world. Even if you're not Christian, people feel a conviction when they break that standard of right and wrong. And the way the Bible explains it is this. In John 16, it says the Holy Spirit will convict the world of sin and of God's righteousness. That means whether we're Christian or not, whether we've been at this a long time or not, the Holy Spirit is prompting us about what's sin and what's not, what's good and what's not. And when we're tempted to do what's selfish, God always prompts us. He prompts you to faithfully obey or to do what's selfish. Being faithful to God means to obey and respond to his prompting. I'll never forget the first time the Holy Spirit convicted me of my sin. He was prompting me. See, the preacher was wrapping up his message. People were going up front for prayer and confession. And I was just sitting there like you. I'm just sitting there, and that last song's playing, and I'm thinking, man, that was a good sermon. These people got a lot out of that today. You ever think that? That was a great message for someone else. And then the band starts playing another song at the end. That never happens. It's always one song, and then they wrap it up. He played another song. What did that mean? Oh, you're waiting for me to go up there, God? You're waiting for me to confess? You're waiting for me to respond and obey and be convicted of my sin? That's what I had to do. I don't think the band would have ever stopped playing if I didn't go up. So I went up for prayer. I went up for confession too. And for each of us, the most important act of faithfulness you will ever make is to confess and to repent of your sins. Even if you don't know what that means yet. I didn't know what it meant to do that. I just did it because I'm responding in obedience and faithfulness. You don't have to understand it in order to respond to God's prompting. And so even after I did that, I didn't always get it right, but I started to be more and more faithful. Each time the Spirit's prompting me, I'm responding to God. I'm responding to every chance to obey him. And I'll always remember how I decided to be faithful in purity, particular purity after becoming a Christian. In faithfulness to God, I obeyed God, and I dated only Christians. God said only date Christians. I'm dating only Christians. That's my response to his prompting. And in faithfulness to God, I obeyed his prompting to save myself for marriage. I said from now on, I'm saving myself for when I'm married. Started dating Jen, and in faithfulness to God, I obeyed him. Jen and I, we didn't move in together until after we were married. That was me following this prompting. And listen, I got to tell you, I'm being vulnerable here. It was so hard for Jen. I'm just kidding. It was hard for me. It was hard for me too, guys. To be faithful before marriage. It is not easy to decide, I'm not going to be selfish. I'm going to respond to God. I'm going to be faithful with this prompting. Guys, if I can do it, and especially her, if we can do it, you can do it, okay? You can respond and be faithful to God and how you respond to sin and selfishness. Remember what Habakkuk 2:4 said, but the righteousness will live by their faithfulness to God. When you're righteous and faithful, you will respond to God and his prompting. Sometimes God, though, prompts us to do something, not necessarily in response to sin and selfishness, but in response to idleness or in response to laziness or anxiety or whatever is safe or easy. Sometimes we always need to choose, God over sin, but sometimes we need to choose God over just nothing, over idleness, over the status quo. And that goes, beyond just avoiding sin. Sometimes God responds us to faithfully obey him by stepping out in faith, taking that risk, giving something that we didn't know we're supposed to give, seizing the opportunity to do good when we don't have to, just doing it when it's just easier to do nothing. God's going to put someone on your heart, a particular person. Who is God putting on your heart? He's prompting you to encourage that person. As a result of what you're hearing today, you're going to reach out, you're going to encourage that person, you're going to reconcile with that person, because who are we? We are faithful. We respond. We obey to that prompting. You're going to reach out to someone and say, hey, I was thinking of you today, and I think I'm supposed to give you this. And I don't know why. But God's prompted me to step out in faith and do this thing. See, that's not against sin. It's just against idleness. I need to encourage you. I need to give you this. What's God prompting you to do or say to someone? God's prompting you to do something and to step out in faith. And it's always a risk when you put yourself out there like that. But you don't worry about the outcome. You let God worry about the outcome. Your responsibility is to obey the prompting. You see, obedience is our responsibility, and outcomes are God's responsibility. What you do is you obey, and you trust him for the outcome. In Acts chapter 20, Paul could have done the safe thing, the easy thing. He could have returned to Ephesus, because he always went back to Ephesus. That was his home base. That's where his friends were. The elders there praying for him. That was home base for him. But here's what he said. He was prompted by God to step out in faith and obedience. And he says, and now, compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there. Not knowing. That's why it's faith. He didn't know what lied ahead. I love that he responded to God in faithfulness and obedience, not knowing the outcome. If you respond knowing the outcome, is it faith? No. Faith is when you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know the outcome. I'm just responding to God. I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to obey and be obedient without knowing the outcome. It's a risk. It's a calculated risk. It's a good risk. But that's what faithful people do. We take wise risks, not knowing the outcome. In 2021, God prompted me to take a risk. The risk was starting a new church, and it was crazy because it was the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. There were no church plants going on in 2021. Zero. It was not happening across the country. It was hard enough getting people to go back to church, to their old church, let alone go to a new church. No one did this. This is crazy. But the prompting is there. I don't know the outcome. It might be a bad outcome, but the prompting's there. I need to obey. And so in 2022, I was prompted again. Hey, it's time to start gathering. I said, gathering? I'm not ready. I have so much more to learn. It says, trust me for the outcomes. You need to obey. I didn't feel ready. I didn't know what would happen, but I got to trust God for the outcomes. That spring, I was prompted again. It's time for a building. Your church needs a building. I said, building? We had 11 people at church last week in my living room. We have plenty of room in this building. It's like, what? I don't know the outcome. Can we afford it? Listen, the prompting is to obey. The outcome is up to God. That's the thing with being faithful. Obedience is our responsibility and outcomes are God's responsibility. And don't get discouraged when you faithfully respond to God in faith. If God doesn't give you that outcome, your wildest dream, that's okay. You let him worry about that outcome. What you do is you respond in faith. Don't be discouraged when you start giving to God, but you don't get that raise at work or that you don't win the lottery. Like the outcomes are up to him. You respond in faith and obedience. Maybe you reach out to reconcile with someone because God's prompting you. That person doesn't want to talk to you. That's God's responsibility. Let him be in charge of that outcome. Your job is to be obedient. Maybe you tried to start a new direction for your family. All right, family, we're going to do something new. We're going to be more faithful. And they push back. Of course they're going to push back. They're selfish still. They're not like you. They're pushing back. You let God worry about that outcome. You worry about this outcome. You respond and obey to God's prompting. And what I learned in this church planting journey is that we vastly overestimate the outcomes of 1 year of obedience. We think, yeah, I've been at this for 1 year. We should be at 500, maybe 1,000 people by now. We should be there. God, where's the outcome? I've been faithful. No, here's what we do though. We overestimate what's going to happen in a year of faithful obedience. We really underestimate what will happen after 10. After a decade of faithful obedience, we all underestimate the outcomes God will give us when we're consistently faithful in the big things and in the small things, in the relationships and in the resources, and in walking away from sin and walking toward God, walking toward his prompting. Don't underestimate the outcomes that he gives you when you're consistently faithful. God's going to bless us with a positive outcome in his time, and until then, we're going to pre-decide. I am faithful. When faced with selfishness, I've pre-decided to be faithful in what? How I respond to God. We'll recap in a sec here. I'll let you recap all those. What did we learn about today? We thought of the most important word in our lives. What was your word? Think of it in your head. Keep that word. It was a great word. But you're going to elevate faithfulness above it. That's going to be your most important word. And how? How do we do faithfulness? Well, we talked about 3 things that Jesus talked about. Faithfulness in how we treat people. Faithfulness in how I steward resources. Faithfulness in how I respond to God. The bottom line is we're faithful. Who are we? We are faithful. Faithfulness is the most important word in our lives. I want you to think back to that word you had at the beginning, that word you thought of. It might have been something like successful, influential, happiness, love. What word did you think of at the beginning? Would you believe me if I told you God's going to give you that for your life? God's going to give you love. God's going to give you success. Whatever that word was, God's going to give you that outcome as a result of your faithfulness. That's why I said faithfulness can change your life, because it's the most important word. God gave 5 more bags of gold to the one who invested the 5 bags of gold. He was faithful with a little. God set him over much. God gave him more. And I believe that as you're faithful, and as that's the most important value that you have in your life, God's going to give you all these other things as well. I'm looking at some honest people here today. You guys, you are honest people. Some of you recognize that I have not been faithful. You were honest. You said it earlier. You said I'm selfish. You're saying it again. I am not faithful. I am anything but faithful. But here's what the scriptures say about that. It says, if we are faithless, he remains faithful. And what that means is even though we sin, even though we fall short, God sent his son to die in our place. He was faithful to us by sending his son so he could die, so we could live. And if we confess our sins to him, then he is faithful and just to forgive sins. Even when we were faithless, he was faithful. And so if you need to step away from sin today, if you need to step into a relationship with God today, I invite you to call on his grace. I invite you to just make Jesus the Lord of your life today. You can do that today. We talked a lot about faithfulness today. We talked about a lot of things today in general, and I don't want you to just think about what I learned about it. I want you to think about what I'm going to do about it. What's your next step? The time for that next step is right now. The place for that next step in your life is right here. It might even be right up here or there. What is that step? Based on what we've talked about, what you've learned, what is your next step of faith? I don't want you to just think about what you've learned today. I also want you to think about what I'm going to do about it. Think about that as I walk off this stage.